The Galactic Council had made a grave miscalculation when they assigned Mira to the Kathrax diplomatic station. Humans, they reasoned, were soft species, weak, slow, and utterly unsuited for interaction with apex predators. The Kathrax were living weapons, evolved on a world where only the fastest and deadliest survived. Their young were born with retractable claws, night vision that could pierce absolute darkness, and reflexes that could snatch plasma flies from midair. No one expected the human to survive the first week. Mira had arrived at the orbital station 3 months ago, her assignment clear, cultural liaison and xenobiologist. The adult Kathrax had regarded her with cool indifference, their vertical pupils tracking her movements with the detached interest of a cat watching a particularly boring insect. She was too small to be a threat, too slow to be prey, and too strange to be ignored entirely. But the cubs were different. The Kathrax raised their young communally in the station's lower levels, a sprawling network of corridors designed to mimic their homeworld's canyon systems. Sharp corners, multiple levels, and polished metal floors that allowed the cubs to practice their hunting slides, a technique where they would sprint at full speed, drop to their bellies, and glide across surfaces to strike prey from unexpected angles. Kiko had been the first to notice. The young Kathrax, barely past her second molt, had cornered Mira in the residential wing one evening. The human had just finished her shift and was padding toward her quarters in her preferred off-duty attire, soft cotton pants and what her species called fuzzy socks. The socks were an absurd creation, fabric tubes that covered the feet, colored in bright purple with small yellow stars and possessing absolutely no tactical value whatsoever. Kiko's ears had swiveled forward, her tail going rigid. In the Kathrax culture, this was the predatory focus position. Mira had frozen, her hand instinctively reaching for the emergency beacon on her belt. Then Kiko had done something unprecedented. She'd looked down at her own bare paws, then back at Myra's socked feet. The human was standing on the polished hallway floor, the same floor the cubs used for sliding practice. A low chirrup escaped Kiko's throat, a sound the translator struggled to interpret but eventually settled on. Interesting? These? Myra had wiggled her toes, the fuzzy fabric shifting. They're just socks. Keeps my feet warm. Kiko had tilted her head, processing. Warmth was irrelevant. The Kathrax regulated temperature through their dense fur. But the texture, the way the human's feet seemed to barely grip the floor. Demonstrate movement, Kiko had demanded, her translator rendering it with the bluntness characteristic of her species. Myra, deciding that cooperation was safer than refusal, had taken a few steps. Her socked feet slid slightly with each movement, the fabric providing almost no traction on the smooth metal. It was inefficient, ungainly, and completely fascinating to the young predator. Again, faster. What happened next would be discussed in xenanthropology papers for decades. Myra had taken a running start and slid across the hallway floor, her arms windmilling for balance, covering nearly 15 feet before friction finally stopped her. She'd laughed that strange barking sound humans made when experiencing joy and looked back at Kiko. The cub's eyes had dilated to full moons. Within an hour, 7 Kathrax cubs had gathered in the hallway. Within 2 hours, Myra had given up trying to explain human clothing customs and had simply distributed half her sock collection. By morning, the station's security feeds showed something that made the adult Kathrax question whether their sensors had malfunctioned. Their apex predator offspring were sliding down hallways wearing brightly colored human foot coverings, their hunting instincts channeled into something the translator could only describe as play. Kiko had become the undisputed champion. The young Kathrax had mastered the art of the sock slide, building speed before dropping into the traditional hunting glide position. But instead of the controlled, purposeful movements of a predator, she would slide past her target, usually another cub tuck into a roll, and come up chirruping with what Mira had learned to recognize as laughter. The adult Kathrax were horrified. The cubs were supposed to be honing survival skills, not whatever this was. But they were also puzzled. The young ones were still practicing their slides, still perfecting their timing and balance. They were just doing it with an enthusiasm that had been absent before. Commander Ratsek, the station's Kathrax liaison, had confronted Mira in her laboratory one afternoon. The massive predator had to duck through the doorway, her battle scars catching the light as she approached the human's desk. "Explain what you have done to our young," Ratsek had growled, though her translator picked up an unusual note in her voice. Confusion, perhaps. or curiosity. Myra had looked up from her datapad, completely unafraid in a way that still unsettled the Kaithrax. I gave them socks. This is not an adequate explanation. They were curious. I shared something from my culture. They found a new way to practice their sliding techniques. Mira had shrugged, a gesture the Kaithrax were learning meant human indifference. Seems like everybody wins. Ratsek's tail had lashed once, twice. They are meant to be warriors. They're children, Myra had replied quietly. Warriors can come later. Let them be children while they can. The commander had stared at the human for a long moment. In Kaithrax culture, young were trained from birth. Softness was trained out. Play was structured, every moment oriented toward survival. The concept of childhood as something separate from preparation was alien. And yet, watching the security feeds, Ratsek had noticed something. The cubs were faster now, more agile. They took risks they hadn't taken before, pushing their bodies in new ways because failure meant only a tumbled landing and more chirruping laughter, not the disappointment of instructors. They were becoming better hunters through joy. 3 months later, when the Galactic Council requested Mira's transfer to a more suitable posting, the Kaithrax delegation had unanimously refused. The human stayed, her sock collection growing to accommodate the station's entire cub population. And if visiting diplomats were puzzled by the sight of apex predator young sliding down hallways in bright pink and green fuzzy socks, chirruping with delight while a small human cheered them on, well, they were learning what the Kaithrax had discovered. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't strength or speed or superior technology. It was the dangerous idea that even warriors needed softness, that efficiency wasn't everything, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act was teaching predators how to play. Kiko, sliding past at terminal velocity in her favorite star-patterned socks, would have agreed if she wasn't too busy perfecting her technique.